So joining me today, I have Chris Smith, who's coming to me from hopefully sunny San Diego. Is it sunny?
Today it is, but I heard in the forecast this week, oh my goodness, it's supposed to be like rain, I think, in the next couple of days. I'm like, oh my goodness. It was nice and sunny today. I mean, it was sunny this weekend. I love it.
I think you're the third person I've had on my podcast so far. I think this is like episode 35 or something like that. And 10% of my podcast guests have come from San Diego. So
No way. Who else?
Tim Ash, he's from San Diego, and Dave Roth. They're
Nice.
both San Diego. And when I came, funny enough, in January of last year, I was over in San Diego. I stayed with Dave and went out for dinner with him and Tim, and we had a great time. So yeah, so
nice.
And now that I know that you're there, hopefully at some point in time we can have a catch up and maybe go and grab.
Definitely, man. What did you guys go out to dinner at when you were here? What restaurant?
I'm trying to think where we went. I'm sure.
Was it by the beach, or was it like a trendy place?
It was a trendy place, and it's funny. I tell the story. So Tim is a keynote speaker, very accomplished guy. He's one of the leading experts in conversion rate optimization. He had a company called Site Tuners. He sold it, and he's now focusing on being a keynote speaker. So that's what he does. He travels all around the world. So he's been to Brazil. He's done workshops, university lectures, all that sort of stuff. And we were there. We were having dinner. We finished off dinner, and Tim's really deep now into some stuff that's really not related to digital marketing at all. As we were leaving the restaurant, this guy comes up and he goes, Tim. And it was a Brazilian guy who was there having dinner with his wife and his son. And basically he said that he had attended one of Tim's lectures online, and having gone to this lecture, it changed his life. He'd bought...
That's high praise, man. That's high.
He'd bought Tim's book, and he asked if he could have a photo taken with him and his wife. So we stood there, we took the photos. And as we were walking away, I turned to Dave and I'm like, I don't know which agency Tim got those actors from, but that's the best setup. It was one of those, had you not experienced it in real life, you would go, that's completely made up. That's never happened. But honestly, it was so amazing to see that kind of feedback. That's what ultimately I think everyone we know like thrives for. You thrive for that sort of feedback that you get. Is completely impartial, almost
totally.
Yeah. So
yeah, and especially if it happens in the real world, that throws you off. It's happened to me a few times in the real world too, but it puts you on almost like it boosts your ego a little too much, inflates it a little too much. It feels good though. We all enjoy that, and it feels great. I like when somebody writes me or texts me or tells me they listen and things like that. It sort of like throws you off because people. You put a podcast out there in the world and you're like, well, I don't know who's listening to this thing. I don't really know. And then you find out people say, oh, I heard this when you said this in your podcast. I'm like, what? I did? Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. That's always fun.
Yeah, I've had quite a few people. I'm at the beginning of my podcast journey. I know that you've been doing it a while, and we'll come on and talk about that. I'm so excited to have you on as a guest. You come through a different channel than most of the guests I normally have. We found each other through Threads, and we'll talk
social
about
media.
That.
Yeah, social media is a great platform to meet people, interact with different creators, different content creators. I've met a lot of folks through the social media platforms, and I think it's where a lot of stuff kind of gets, I guess, born. The relationships get born in that social media spot. If you think about it, that's what social media is all about, really.
Yeah.
Social.
But it's what it should be about. I think a lot of people have taken it and they've turned it into kind of things that it's really not about. That's probably one of the things I really like about Threads is it's like Twitter, but 10 years ago, and where everyone's positive and upbeat and sharing encouragement and everything rather than dragging people down. So,
yeah. And there's also a lot of fake people on all those social media platforms, not just Threads, not just Twitter, X. There's a lot of fake nonsense too, and you have to kind of like filter through that stuff. I guess it's like anything in life, really. Anywhere you go, it's sometimes hard to trust who's really behind the thing that's being said online.
So Chris, to get to where you are now with your company, Podtastic Audio, you transitioned to being a podcaster with your wife. Before that, I think you were a truck driver. Is that right? You're still a truck driver?
Yeah, that's right. Still am, yeah.
How cool.
So the reason I got into audio, as a driver, as a truck driver, or even if you're an Uber driver, a taxi driver, whatever kind of driver you are, audio, listening to like the radio and podcasts and audio format is like your thing. It's a thing you consume the most. And since I've been driving for so long, audio is something I consumed for so long. I always consumed audio. a lot of morning radio stuff, radio shows, and then I discovered podcasting probably somewhere around, I think 2009. I discovered podcasting because I used to work the morning shift at my other job. And during the morning radio, you guys call them breakfast shows and things like that. So have morning radio shows would be a big thing here, there, they're a big thing everywhere. So I would listen to my favorite morning shows. And then when I had to switch shifts and go work like the evening shift or afternoon shift, like, man, I can't listen to my radio shows no more. What's up with that? I was kind of bummed out. So then I discovered, someone told me about podcasting. I'm like, what's this podcasting about? And I discovered it on my first iPhone I had. And I was like, well, this is kind of cool. And then I realized that, oh, I can listen, because the morning shows were putting like a rebroadcast version of their morning show on a podcast version. Now that I can take it with me and listen to it at night or on the weekends or whenever I'm available. This is great. I love it. So that's kind of where I got started listening to podcasts, was like the fact, more of a convenience thing, really, because I really loved audio, but I wanted to be able to listen to that same audio at my convenience, which may not be as convenient for that 6 to 10 morning slot or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So how did you end up doing a podcast with your wife?
Well, like I said, I've always loved radio. I love morning radio. I went to the radio station. I was in radio in college, and I love radio stuff. And then I went to the radio station probably around 2015. I got to sit in with the morning show and do a full, I think it was like 6 to 10 o'clock, like the whole morning show shift. I was in there with the studio with them, watch them do everything. I was there with them. I was like, this is super cool. And then I've always loved the idea of maybe making a podcast. And the funny thing about getting a podcast started for me was that it started probably around, I think, 2019 when we started the podcast. But just slightly before that, my son was younger. He had an Xbox, game console, and he wanted those headsets that you can talk to your buddies through the thing. You can communicate and play games at the same time. So I went on Amazon, ordered some super cheap, like $15, $20 little, one of those cheapy ones, on Amazon. And it came in the mail, and I opened the thing up, and I'm like, this is kind of cool, neat, and I saw a little plug. I plugged it into the computer, like the old-fashioned computer jack thing. I'm like, plug this thing into the computer, and then I start playing with it, and I start recording my own voice into the computer software somehow, playing it back. And I'm like, this is kind of fun. I wonder if I make a podcast with this stupid thing, for fun. And I was playing around with it. I said, told Christine, I said, hey, do you want to make a podcast? It'd be fun. Let's make a podcast together. And she's like, I don't know. We were just dating at the time. She's like, I don't know. I don't got time for that. Come on. I said, it'll be fun. We'll just play with it. We'll just experiment. We'll just have fun. We'll play. We'll just have a good time. So then I had to look up, how do I make two microphones go into the computer at the same time? I knew nothing about any of this stuff. And so I'm like, well, maybe we should get some better microphones in this headset thing. And then I'm looking up what's a cheap microphone, because I didn't know if I want to spend a lot of money on this whole podcasting gear, because I didn't know if we were going to even keep doing it past one episode. Yeah. So I'm like, let's go on Amazon. I'm going to look up the cheapest microphones I can, because you can click on the dollar amount. I clicked on the cheapest I could find. Found 2 cheap USB microphones. Then I had to research, how do you get my computer to take both these microphones in at the same time? How are we going to pull that off? Maybe hear each other through headphones if we get that going. How do we make all that kind of happen? And I kind of made it happen. It get going with my old computer, and we recorded our first episode, and I was very nervous, very, very nervous, because I think for me, for podcasting, since I love radio so much, since I love broadcasting so much, I felt like I was kind of stepping into that world a little bit, the world that I respected and was in awe of. Here I'm stepping into it with a little podcast. And back then I didn't know that indie podcasts even existed. I just knew of the big ones, the big radio show ones, or the big news ones, or the big names. I just knew those. I didn't know indie podcasting was even a thing. Yeah. So I'm going into this thinking we're like them.
What is an indie podcast for the benefits of listeners?
Okay, I would consider an indie podcast somebody that is a solo podcaster that's doing everything on their own with independent gear, paying for their own pocket, and they usually have a day job that goes along with it. The podcast is not their main thing. It's a hobby thing. Yeah. And so versus any company.
So you're an indie and I'm an indie, right? I have my agency, consultancy. I've got various communities and forums that I'm involved with. And to me, the podcast was, I guess it was one of those things. I was just before Christmas, I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a podcast. So I did it, and I got one off the ground. My very first guest was a guy called John Loomer, who I've been a big fan of for a long time. This was
great.
Virtually all of the people I've had on as guests have been people I've been fans of their work for quite some time.
That's great. That's great.
Like yourself, I've followed your journey on Threads. Again, you're always, to me, one of the few people I see that everything is always inspiring, upbeat, positive. It's very meme driven, very funny, and I like that about you, right?
I lead with humor. If it's funny, I'm going with it. That's kind of the way I do it. This humor is like the groundbreaking, worldwide, like icebreaker for everything is like humor.
Yeah.
Really, it's the way I look at it.
I know there are people listening because I like you. I've had people reach out to me and say, Jim, I listened to your podcast. It was great. Listen to this episode. It was fantastic. I've had people come to me as podcast guests because they watched another episode or listened to another episode, said they really enjoyed it and they would love to come and talk to me. Great. Fantastic. Because ultimately it's not about me. It's about like I said, the audience, and it's about the guests that I have and trying to understand and help share their stories with the listeners that I have. Yeah. And that audience will just gradually grow, hopefully over time. And if it doesn't, who cares? At the moment, I'm still having fun doing it. Right.
As long as you're having fun, and you're enjoying what you're doing, then it's really what matters. I mean, there are people who play lots of different sports for fun without thinking they're going to go pro because they enjoy doing it. Yeah. They enjoy doing it. That's kind of what I do. When I create podcasting, I got started with the podcast. I love audio. I love creating stuff. So when Christine and I got going, people, like, the first episode was very nerve-wracking. It was very nervous for me. First one, second one, third one. And then people said they liked it. And I'm like, what? You liked it? What are you talking about? It was like, I didn't think it was that great. I'm like, well, it was fun. It's going to sound great. I'm like, really? Okay. So then I thought, like, well, maybe people actually, maybe we should do more of these, more than just a couple. At first, we were just going to do a couple to see what happened, like a fun little thing. And I'm like, well, let's try to maybe we should upgrade the gear. By episode 20 or so, we got better mics, an audio interface, a little better stuff, and then we be able to take on interviews. And so, since my whole idea about everything was audio only, interviews were done audio only also. So all our interviews were audio only. Everything was audio only. We didn't do hardly any video at all. And I started doing that. And this is going into like 2020 when everybody started a podcast around March when COVID lockdown, shutdown type stuff. Yeah. So a lot of those podcasts just hit the market, like thousands and thousands of podcasts blew up, and social media blew up with all these different podcasters. And they would reach out to me asking for advice and different questions, like, how do you make your show sound so great? How to make your audio sound so great? All these different questions. And so I was like, well, I guess I could maybe do a course, but I'm really too busy as it is. I'm already doing the podcast. I'm working full time because I didn't get shut down during COVID. I had to go to work.
You were even more busy, right?
Exactly. So I was like, I don't have time for all that, but I'm like, what if I could maybe make another side podcast accompanying the other podcast, kind of like a behind the scenes, like, hey, how do we do this? If how do we make our show sound like this, or how do we do different things? That's kind of where Podtastic Audio started. Was because of that happened in throughout 2020. I think I launched my first episode was like beginning of January of like 21, but really I kind of like started the idea of Podtastic Audio with people asking me questions during 2020. How do you use this tool and that kind of stuff? So then I started Podtastic Audio, and it's kind of blown up since then. And so I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and I've kind of, at first, early episodes of Podtastic Audio were basically like the basic stuff, like, hey, use this software, use this kind of microphone, new kind of microphone you need to use, just real basic stuff. And then I kind of record and what I've used and tools I've used and samples of things I've used. And then I've kind of evolved since then. I've done guest interviews. I've done guest interviews on the other show a lot, but I've done some guest interviews on Podtastic Audio at first. And I've kind of weaved away from some of the generic interviews I was doing at first. Because early on in Podtastic Audio, I was doing a lot of like, hey, you got a podcast? Come on, let's talk about it, whatever. But some of those weren't very good, to be honest with you. They weren't very good interviews. And I feel like they didn't really serve the audience that well. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do interviews as much anymore. But if I do an interview, I want to make sure that somebody's in the podcasting space, somebody works for a podcasting company or something like that, or something like that. Yeah. So those are the interviews I've been taking on of late, and now
it's definitely a challenge. I found with the benefits of hindsight is 2020 vision. So as you say, like when you do audio only, the kind of speed at which you can get output so much quicker. If you're doing guests, then you've obviously got to research the guest and make sure everything kind of works. And because we're doing video, we've got to make sure that video's okay. I've always found that sometimes again, I think a lot of the people that you see kind of doing podcasts, whether it's video or audio, the audio quality may not be very good. The video quality may be grainy and what have you. And I think sometimes that, like, you can almost forgive the video for, if it's grainy, no worries, as long as the audio is okay. So as long as the audio is good,
Right.
we've got sort of like the makings of the episode. And I think sometimes that's where, again, I think people economize on the gear. They kind of dumb down the mic, get the cheap one just because they think, well, that's the best thing.
Right.
Or they'll use the MacBook Pro and the microphone in that. Some of the AI tools now, like Adobe Podcasts, have got that AI functionality, which really make, you can almost like literally talk into your phone, and it's got all the background noise, and it mutes all that. It's amazing.
I use it. I use it all the time. I use it for a client's podcast. My client's podcast, I record for them. But back when we started, we didn't have any. So we had a couple little things, but not much. Everything was kind of like, I had to figure it out myself and figure out stuff. And I think worrying about audio only, not doing video, and I don't think my old computer could have handled like video like this really that well anyway. So thank goodness we didn't really do it. We had times where my computer kind of crapped out during the recording, just an audio recording. It sounded okay to us as we're hearing it, but then when I played the audio back, it would like garble up the audio in a few spots. And it turns out the old computer had a bunch of like dust like around the motherboard. I had to like blow it all off and clean it off and that kind of stuff. So it was kind of like, it was getting really hot too. It was like so hot. So I did upgrade to a Mac from Windows computer. So, and I'm on another Mac now I just got, but I love the Mac stuff. It works pretty well, and it works well with my iPhone and all my stuff. So it works pretty good for my ecosystem, and I love it for that kind of stuff. And I think what it comes down to is like, how easy is it for you to create the content? Because for me, it was like trying to figure out, how do I make this content? I mean, how do I make the thing work? Like, how to make these parts all put together? This crappy microphone with this old computer and have this software. Like, how do I make this? I'm worried about keeping this car from falling apart driving down the racetrack.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to worry about, let alone trying to win the race. I'm just trying to keep the thing from falling apart. And that's kind of where I was doing. That's kind of where Podtastic Audio kind of started, was like, hey, I'm using, basic gear, basic stuff, probably worse gear than you're using right now, yet my stuff sounds better. So here's what I've been doing with what I have. Maybe it can help you too. And you don't have to spend $10,000 on a microphone and equipment to put a good show together. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, think of your favorite content creator, whether it's a podcaster or a YouTuber or anybody. Think about them and think, do you know what kind of gear they have? Probably not. You probably don't care.
Yeah,
you probably you know.
I've become too geeky. I always look and go, oh, he's got that microphone. He's got all that.
Well, yeah. I guess as a content creator, but the average person,
I have no idea. But I sit down with my wife. We watch the news on TV, right? And somebody's doing an interview, and instead of watching and listening to what the person's saying, I'm complaining about how crappy their lighting is and how bad the audio is. And it's fair enough if they're in Israel and they're kind of shooting like live from the field, fair enough. But if they're actually at home in a studio at home or in their home office, they should really, again, they take the trouble to put shirts and ties and like dress up and look good, but they sound awful, right? And the lighting's horrible, and they've got big light windows behind them to kind of blow out the whole, picture quality. And you think, wow, I mean, again, I'm surprised that there's not more people like yourself that are offering to help people kind of do that. And again, that's probably what the where Podtastic Audio can really kind of help out, is to kind of help people to, take some of that headache away from them. Because
right, yeah, I mean, there are lots of tools out now that can, like you mentioned, with the Adobe Enhance, and I mean, there's lots of different tools for creators. I mean, I've been using a Rodecaster Pro too, and there's the Rodecaster Duo, and there's other tools like that kind of like do. The way I describe this thing is like a radio station in a box.
Yeah,
like everything a radio station can do, this thing can pretty much do, and it's fairly cheap compared to like this kind of stuff, this kind of gear 10 years ago would have been like $5,000 or something like that. It would have been a ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah, it's funny. So, like I always look at the gear I have. I mean, I've got a Rodecaster Pro original, not a 2, and every time I see people now, they've got the new version, they've got the 2, or they've got the Duo. I keep looking, going, I really should kind of get rid of this and get it. But it works perfectly fine, does the job, right?
Nice.
It's not about the gear. I mean, again, you can have the best gear in the world if you don't have the right guests and you don't really know what to say, then it doesn't matter. So,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it could be a total clown show where just like you're on there yeah, so the best lighting, best cameras, best gear, best flashy whatever. But if the content it falls flat and you're just sitting there just like smiling and not talking about nothing, then I can't imagine anybody sticking around for that. Maybe if you're a very beautiful woman, I think those are the ones that can get away with it. They'll just sit there and just smile, look pretty. But even then, it's like if you're going to do a podcast where you're actually going to be saying something, you gotta have something important to say.
yeah. I know that
You
people are
know?
not watching my podcast episodes on video because of how fantastically good looking I am.
Are you sure about that?
Well, maybe, I don't know. So your Podtastic audio, you started sort of like 2021-ish.
Yeah.
And your the podcast that you did with Chris and Christine show, looks like you stopped that, or you stopped publishing episodes to that sort of about a year ago. Why was that?
Well, Christine, she has multiple jobs in another business, and so it just became too difficult to schedule guests. We were having guests come on, and we had to keep bumping them and keep bumping them and keep bumping them, like rearranging and different things, and eventually just got too busy. And I think that she needed a break from it, and with her other business taking off, it just became so difficult to even schedule things, I guess, so to speak. Schedule recording and things like that. So that's kind of where that's kind of sat. If that's fine, if it's too busy, that's fine. I'm not gonna like close down the podcast. Is still gonna live online as long as I keep paying for the hosting. It's gonna live online, so it's still there. It's just that we're not creating new episodes at this moment. So I don't know when or if the timeline for that show to return is going to happen. But in the meantime, Podtastic audio is going stronger than ever. So, I think it's great. It gives me something. I guess it keeps me. What's the word I'm looking for? It's more like you're kind of like always like if you're an athlete, you're always training, but you're not like playing. You're always kind of warming up and practicing a lot. So Podtastic audio is like keeps me kind of fresh and keeps me going with this editing software and different things. Now, if I were to like stop cold turkey and all of a sudden it's been like a year and I jump back into podcasting, I'm like, what button does what? How do I record? Is this thing even on? Like, how do you know what I mean? So I think the fact that I keep doing it all the time, Podtastic audio not only is a good resource for indie podcasters to help them make their podcast, but also helps me keep me going, keep me fresh in the game, keep me figuring out how to record stuff and edit stuff. And the same thing with my client show too. So for clients, what I do is I actually record their show for them live on my end. Because if you're new, you're coming into podcasting, you know nothing about audio, know nothing about microphones, know nothing about any of this stuff. You gotta record and like where do I record stuff and how do I do this? It gets kind of complicated.
Yeah.
So I say, well, here's the deal. Why don't I send you a link and you link into me? I'll help you join the link live. I'll be there coaching you, help you live. I'll press record on my end. You don't have to press record on your end at all. And I'll do everything on my end. That way you can do your show and relax and know that I'm here handling all the recording part of it all. Think of it like a singer singing a song in the glass box booth room, and they got the producer behind the glass pushing all the buttons on the console, and they're recording it all. I'm like that guy, but over the internet for them. So they come in, they record their show. I record their show for them, and I use Clean Feed because it gives a quick stream, a quick low latency, high quality version of their audio directly to me, and I can download it directly. And I get the whole file in seconds through a zip file they do. And literally within literally as soon as we hang up the call, I can go to work on their audio like immediately and have it done for them very quickly. So that's what I do for them. And I package it all and I throw it onto their media host for them. And then I email them and say, your episode's out. Here you go. We'll schedule the next one. And then, but also nice that the fact this company is in San Diego. Well, they're nationwide, but their headquarters are in San Diego. And so the vice president who I deal with, he's the host of the show and he is in San Diego. So our lining times up isn't that bad. I always tell him like middle of the day and when I'm available, and he schedules and shows up and I record it and it's great.
Yeah,
I can do it again.
Because I think, as much as, people say it's all about the talent and the talent's important, I think the production and editing is just as important, right? If you can have the best content, but if the production and editing is kind of, hasn't really taken care of things that need to be taken care of, then it will be sort of more difficult to kind of get it to where you need it to be. And I'm always amazed at how few businesses have adopted using a podcast to kind of help put their business at the front and center of the ecosystem that they happen to be in as thought leaders, experts in the field or whatever it might be, because, it's such a great way of showcasing your talent in a non kind of salesy way. Because, again, even though virtually every podcast guest that I have on is working in a business and promoting something in one way, shape or form, whether it's they've got their own podcast, they're promoting books they've written, they're promoting services that they offer. There's a good and a bad way to do that. I think that's the most important thing. It's a bit like I run paid ads, right? And the reason I think the paid ads work is that people seeing them don't think that they're ads. If they feel that they're being sold to, they're going to be less inclined to want to buy. Whereas if they see something that kind of tells a good story, has a good hook, and walks them through that journey, then I think that they're far more likely to want to engage with that brand. So
yeah, well, when it comes to building anything like a podcast or YouTube, I was on YouTube many years ago. I still have a couple channels I do, but I got into YouTube probably, I'm gonna say 2006, 2000, right around Google bought it. But during that time, like so long ago. But I never looked at it as a place. I never looked at it as like I guess, performance. Look at me. I'm gonna try to grow this thing. I'm gonna build a channel kind of thing. I looked at YouTube like a place to put videos to share with my family.
Yeah.
Because it was hard to email a video because it was so big. The file was so big. So I found this YouTube platform where I could put a video on there that I made. And then I can say, here, send a link to family and friends. Here, check the video out. Here it is. And that's how I got into YouTube, was using it as like a family sharing platform. And so that's what I've done. And I've done some fairly, some of my videos have done fairly well, whatever, but they weren't like designed to do well. I didn't design them that way to like, hey, check this out. But one thing I have learned about YouTube when I started the Chris Christine show, the very first episode, I listened to a lot of YouTube. I watched a lot of YouTube back then, but I did not watch any like podcast YouTube. It was like other like people doing stuff, like stuff being done.
Yeah.
And I had a sports car back then when Christine and I met. I had a sports car, and so I watched a lot of videos based on that car that other content creators were doing on YouTube. And some of the videos they would do, they would start off with like this kind of crazy action scene that kind of happened, like either they crashed or they did something, and then they kind of like do their open, and then they would go into their like their whole video thing, whatever, right? I'm thinking like kind of like that idea of having like this kind of hook at the beginning of like something kind of like, well, what was that just happened? And then kind of go into the show. I thought, well, what if we did that for the podcast? Because what they were doing is they were taking a clip of that video, something happened within that video, taking a clip of that and putting it in the very front of the video to kind of get you excited about the video.
Yeah.
Well, that's an idea. So then I thought, well, what if we did that for our podcast? But I guess I just pull a clip of something at in the middle, somewhere in the middle of the episode.
There's always a killer point, isn't it? In every episode, there's always a killer kind of, almost like a cliffhanger or hook or something that kind of gets people.
Right. So that's what I would try to do. I would try to find something like that, whether it's from a guest, we started doing that, or from us saying something funny and clever, just throwing it at the beginning, just to kind of something kind of like, I guess, kickstart the interview, kind of kickstart the episode kind of a thing. And then later with Podtastic, I didn't do that at all. I just cold opened with an intro of music and stuff. But then probably, I don't know how long ago, I started doing this thing where I was like, wait a second. What if I started the show saying what the show was about and then lead into the intro versus just kind of cold open and whatever? So I think that's a much better way to open a show, is to say, hey, on today's episode, we're talking to Jim about such and such or whatever. And you can believe what he did when he was 20 years old, or something like that. And then just lead into the thing.
Yeah. Because I was thinking the intro is something that I think should be recorded after you've recorded the actual episode itself. Because in that way you can kind of segue into
then
it.
And then not only that, that's exactly how I do it. So I do it, I'll record my regular episode, and then I'll stop the episode. I'm thinking, what was the key points about this episode? What would be a good hook for this thing I just said? So then I'll just record the hook part at the end, and then through a clever editing, I can just flip it around and cut it, paste it over there. And then I can just do a few adjustments in Audacity, which I love to use for all my editing for audio. And because you can move things around and you can fade things and do a lot of that's like the first thing I learned, man. When I got into podcasting, the very first thing I learned was I was looking up like audio editing software for free. Cause like I said, I didn't want to spend a ton of money on this, and I didn't know if I was going to stay around for this. So I was like, something free and easy. So I started dropping files in there and different audio things in there. I started like realizing I can move it around. I can make it sound like this. I can make it sound like that. I can make it play backwards. And I go, this is so cool. So then I started like messing around. That's kind of how I figured out how to do the editing, was just playing around with this kind of stuff for fun.
Yeah.
And that was it, you know?
Yeah. It's funny. Like I know that in all honesty, like I'm at the point now where I probably should go, you know what? I'm going to outsource the editing and everything. I really enjoy doing it. I mean, it's something that, I have the time to do it. I'm kind of at the latter stages of my agency stroke consultancy career rather than the beginning of it. I'm not, you see these people, they're aspiring to grow massive agencies to flip and sell, and I've been there and I've done that and I don't want to do any more of it. I'm just very content to kind of have the clients that I work with, they're all good friends of mine. I enjoy the work I have with them. I want to help as many people in the industry as I can. But at the same time, it's like I've got have some free time. And again, I just found that I transitioned from live events, speaking at conferences, kind of where I flew them because of the pandemic. I had to kind of reinvent myself. So I ended up going out and buying a whole bunch of gear and lighting and audio and whatever else. And that's sort of became something that I thought, well, now I have all this stuff, I might as well kind of do something with it. Right. So I think that's really the origins of the podcast, was just, I got the gear, I better use it. And I just found that I really enjoy it. But, I love peeling it almost like an onion. I like peeling the layers and finding kind of what else you can kind of do. And as you say, like the hooks and the intros and the end screens and all that sort of, like it's all, if you think about it, every sort of ecosystem that happens, the YouTube creators, the Facebook advertisers, the Google advertisers, they all have a kind of a methodology in the way in which they kind of approach things. And, if you understand what that methodology is, it's very easy for you to be able to kind of fit in and say, I know the kind of the mechanics of how that works, right? So that whole mechanism that you described about the hook at the beginning and with the, you never believe what this happened. Yes, you can kind of do more things with visual hooks, but sometimes the visual hooks, again, I mean, I spent some time uploading stuff to TikTok. You see a lot of people, they'll grab some random object that they have on their desk. I mean, you see people with they've got the sort of the Rode Wireless Go receiver, and they kind of stick it on the end of a fork and they talk into it that way, because then that way it's a visual hook. People go, why is he talking to a fork? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So for me, it's kind of, again, I think you've got to, have something more than just a hook. You can't just go, well, there's the hook and everything else is crap. You've got to make sure that everything else kind of slots into place.
It's like what are these, like clickbait type of stuff. You see a lot of titles and thumbnails on YouTube that are very, like, it's all about the clickbait. It's all like the crazy thumbnail where the person's like, in the shot, whatever. And then like, big words saying I sold my house today or something like that or whatever. Some crazy thing. And I think you're like, oh, what's that about? You click on it. But you also will notice on YouTube that the retention rate is very, very, very low.
Yeah.
Like you'll see like everybody clicks it at first and then it just drops off. Like, I think if you can get your audience to stay 50% of your video, you're like in the elite club of content creators. Podcasting, the retention rate's much higher. That's one thing about audio versus video. And I know people love video, and I came from YouTube before I did podcasting. The retention rate on a podcast is way, way higher than a video on YouTube. And think about it, if you're on YouTube and you're watching YouTube, on the screen of YouTube, there's all these other pretty looking other videos to watch to get you to click off of that one and watch those ones. So you're just hopping from video to video to video. You're just hopping along different videos. Well, the podcast doesn't really happen because you have to subscribe to all the shows. And if you're subscribed to the shows, then the only shows you're going to see are the ones that you've subscribed to if they got an update in your phone that day or whatever. So, and usually people put their phone in their pocket and listen to their earbuds, or they're got it plugged into their car and they're listening on their radio and and they're doing that kind of stuff. It's usually not in their hand. They're not usually watching the phone while they're listening to a podcast. So there's that too. So I think podcasting is great for long form content, audio wise. But when it comes to video wise, I think video shines better if you have short form stuff, clips, short form stuff, not so much the long form, because that retention rate is so short on a long form or any video for that matter. So I think a good video, what I've seen where video works really well on YouTube for podcasting wise is we take like a long interview and say they talk about 4 different topics. So then you take an hour interview, you chop those down to 15-minute clips. That's easier to digest on YouTube. Now you got 4 separate pieces of content on YouTube, and you can make 4 separate thumbnails and 4 separate things of it. And I think that's the better way to go if you're going to try to put things on YouTube or as like a long form interview. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to kind of like, again, I'm very aware of the listener's time. So what I try and do is I try and make sure that if they want to jump into a certain part of an episode, that they have sort of transcripts that say, well, we talk about this particular thing at this point in the episode. So then that way they can kind of go straight to that piece. So if they only want to listen to us shoot the breeze about San Diego and the weather, they can kind of jump to, the introduction to whatever it might be. So,
right. Yeah. That's where a chapters comes in play. Timestamps and chapters, whether it's on YouTube or on a podcast. I started doing that recently on my stuff. I found a really cool app that was free. Someone sent me that made it super easy to embed chapters into your file and even artwork right into your file easily. Like, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And so I was doing it the hard way.
Yeah. I host my cast with Captivate, and again, they got, you have the ability, you can kind of do a sort of a bulk intro, a bulk outro, so that's the kind of the hook at the beginning and everything else. But you can also kind of put the if you want to have ad spots through your episode,
dynamic ad spots,
ad spots. So again, I've always kind of said that I've always tried to pride myself on my ability to do what they call ancillary monetization. So, you might say, well, on YouTube, you need to have, 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours in order for you to be able to be monetized to make money from AdSense. And I'm like, screw that. I don't want to kind of wait until I've got 4,000 subscribers. I mean, I've got 360 subscribers and I started in 2012. I think at that rate, I'll probably be about 410 by the time I get to 1,000 subscribers. But obviously what I'm able to do, I affiliate with other partners, so I affiliate with Captivate, I affiliate with Descript, I affiliate with Notion, and obviously I can put affiliate links to various things, and I can kind of pepper my episodes if I choose to. I mean, most of the episodes I have nothing in them at all. There's no sort of sponsorship actually in the content itself, right? Maybe in the show notes, fine, I might put some stuff in there, but generally speaking, the actual shows itself, there may be a small intro to basically try and get people to encourage them to subscribe. Probably a waste of time to do that. You might be able to tell me to the contrary, but for me, it's sort of, I just want to have the ability that if I want to be able to do it retrospectively. So let's say I wanted to do a live, let's say I was going to do a live in-person event or something like that. And I wanted to kind of try and get anyone that's ever listened to a podcast episode to know about it. I can put that as an intro for a period of time, just in the run up to the episode, the actual event happening. And then once it's finished, I can go back to whatever it was on there before. So I'm not having to kind of go and chop and change. I mean, obviously with YouTube videos, once it's up, it's up. You can't go in there and do anything other than kind of take it down.
Right.
You can't unlist it. You can't really edit it. I mean, yes, you can kind of trim bits, but you can't add stuff in if you choose to. So that's where I think audio really does well.
Yeah, the dynamic ads you're talking about work great if, like, say you do a speaking event at this day, that day, it'll put that ad in that spot, but it'll put it through all the episodes. So even if somebody went back and is listening to episodes from a year ago, that same current ad for your speaking this Friday, it's going to be in those ads too with the dynamic stuff, but you can pull them out and change them out and things like that. I think that's a great place to put it, but people do use them for ads, but I think a better place to do it is to put it for like events you're going to be hosting or places or things happening like this Friday right now, the store is selling such and such, come get it, this Friday only. But it's going to go through all your episodes. I think it's a great place to put that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But, you don't have to necessarily go out and find brand partnerships or anything like that. I mean, that's really just something that, again, I've always said that the best thing to do is if you have services and things that you promote yourself, doing them in your own podcast is probably the best way to do it, right? I mean,
that's what it's for.
I picked up my last 2 clients on the back of podcast episodes because they just listened to it and said, well, he actually sounds like he knows what he's talking about. We've been doing it a while. He must have some skills. And I picked up 2 clients on the back of that. So
yeah, I've heard a lot of podcasters that are so nervous that when you hear them on their microphone, especially if they do like a solo episodes.
I hate those, I've got to say.
I know people, I just have a knack for them. I don't know what it is, but I was nervous
You're
doing a solo
very good.
episode.
I've got to tell you, Chris, you are phenomenal. I kept thinking, God, he is so good at doing that whole thing. I don't know if you do it off a script or something, but it just seems
A little bit of both, a little bit of bullet points, a little bit of both, a little bit top of the head. It just depends. It depends, but I'll get so sidetracked. But the way I do a solo episodes is that first off, I don't do them via video because if I did them via video, they'd be a hot mess because I'd be so like, okay, well, do I look right? Is this thing okay? And screwing the whole thing up. So they're audio only, which takes the pressure off that way. And then also, too, is that because I'm recording directly into Audacity, directly into my editing software, I can stop at any point if I said something stupid and go back, cut that part out, and retake right there. So I can do the retakes as I go. So if I say, that's dumb, let's do that one again. And I can keep going that way. So that's kind of the episode gets built. It's like a lot of me screwing up and just like retaking it. And just like at the end of the day, when it's all done, it's like one solid, episode. But it's a lot of screw ups, a lot of retakes as I go, and that's how it works for me. And I think I couldn't pull that off if I was doing video. So that's why a lot of that stuff's not really done video. It's all done audio wise. But like I said, solo episodes, you can kind of tell someone gets very nervous. And I think confidence on a podcast, whether it's a video or even audio, especially when somebody hears that, the listener hears you being confident on the microphone, especially like a solo episode. They're like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. I want to work with this guy because he sounds like he's got his stuff together. Like he sounds like professional. He sounds legit. He sounds like he's like, oh, not fumbling. I think I've heard some shows where people sound so nervous. They sound like they're fumbling and nervous.
the stupid thing is, so I mean, I've traveled loads of places and delivered keynote presentations. I've stood in front of 1,500 people and done live kind of like presentations, one-day workshops. Stick me in front of a camera and a microphone, I just go to pieces. If it's just me, like if I'm just trying to do a solo thing, I'm in pieces, which is probably one of the reasons why I opted to go down the route of doing casts with guests, because then that way I've got a little bit of, somebody I can kind of bounce stuff off.
Dude, I was the same way too, man. When I started the podcast, that's why I asked Christine to do it. When I first got started, I asked her to jump on and do it together because I didn't know. Like, I don't think I could carry a show by myself or anything by myself. I kind of wanted that kind of conversation, that back and forth, that kind of like bounce back and forth. And then when you bring guests in, when you have two people doing a guest interview, it does get a little like awkward at some points because now you're thinking like, oh, who's going to ask the next question? Are you asking or am I asking? And being that we are audio only, we were able to give each other hand signals across the room. Get like, look, you're next, and I'm next, and like that kind of stuff. And there's sometimes some of the hand signals got kind of so funny because sometimes we have a guest on, it was really, really boring. And so I do like the whole like, oh my God, like we do those kind of things while we're like, she's like, knock it off, pay attention, pay attention, while we're doing it. And so having the freedom of being audio only gave us the flexibility to be able to like do hand gestures behind the scenes and do things behind us that the guests couldn't see. So we kind of like, no, okay, you're asking the next one. Yes, we have like a list of questions. Okay, no, you're asking this one. No, I'm asking, kind of all, right in the same room, which kind of worked out. So if we were doing video, that wouldn't worked out at all.
Yeah.
So
interesting. I just wondered if you had some quick tips for being a really good podcast host and then some quick tips for being a good podcast guest.
Okay, let's start with the easy one. Being a good podcast host. Being a podcast host is about delivering value to your listener. And before you even do that, I guess you got to know who your listener really is. So being a good podcast host, you need to have a clear message on, I'm going to talk about this, and this, and it's for this person. But you got to know exactly what those things are. You can't just jump in saying, I'm going to talk about, my dog today because I feel like it or whatever. But you are making a episode, you're making a show, hopefully for someone to listen other than, your mom or dad, but maybe you don't, I don't know. So you want to make sure you want to know who that person is or get an idea of who that person is. So for me, like with Podtastic Audio, the listener I have in mind for that show is somebody who is an indie podcaster doing it by themselves, just maybe a laptop and a microphone. They work a full-time job. They're doing this as a hobby on the side. Maybe someday they like to go pro, but they're not pro. When I say pro, I mean somebody that is physically like has money backing the podcast. They got a producer, they've got multiple producers, they've got a company behind it. If the podcast is not making any money, they're done. They're not continuing. They don't want to do this anymore. But an indie podcaster is having fun. They're enjoying this. It's a hobby. They love it. They do it for the fun of it. That's where I consider like a hop indie podcaster versus like a professional one. So know exactly who you are. And that's who I serve with my show, and try to deliver as much value you can to that person. At the same time, try to make it entertaining and fun, and have a fun personality if you can. I mean, some people come on and they're just like reading a script, line by line, A, B, C, D, and they go through it, and it doesn't sound very entertaining. There's no personality behind it. People will come to your show for the content, but they will stay for the host and the host personality, because there would be multiple shows that have covered the exact same thing, but you realize you'll like lean towards one more than the other. I always kind of wonder, why is that? Oh, it's because I like that person or that person. Same thing with morning radio, same thing with the news, same thing with anything like that. They'll be covering pretty much the same thing, but you'll like one host over the other because you like that host better than the other person.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same content. So content's cool and all, but you want them to stick around. You got to have a good personality and a good hook. Now, being a good guest, that's a tricky one. I've only been a guest a few times. So being a guest,
You've been a good guest to me.
Oh man. I think being a good guest is about listening to what the host is saying, and what questions they have coming up, what they want to talk about. Also have your talking points kind of figured out too. Like being a good guest, realizing that you are coming on this person's show because you are an expert in these things, or these things, and you're going to talk about these things. So kind of have those things kind of ready to go, kind of in the chamber, as they say, so that when the guest comes on, you're not just like, oh, I don't know.
I'll talk about anything.
Kind of clueless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not only that too, I think having reps too, I think helps out too. We've had some guests come on the Chris Christine show that did not want to go off topic, because we were very conversational, and they didn't want to they want to stick to the script, whatever they had in mind of what they're going to say. That's all they wanted to talk about, nothing else really. And then he had other guests that were great, that were just like talking about all kinds of things. Oh, we had weather in San Diego, and talk about different place to eat, and and this kind of stuff, and how the kid stories. It all comes down to stories. Yeah. As a guest, have great stories that serve the audience and know who you're talking to, and a good story, and not only a good story, but told in a very, and I guess, entertaining way, but also kind of an intriguing way that keeps the listener hooked and curious to what happens next. So, and deliver value best way you can to serve that audience that you're coming on. Yeah, that's what I can say about that, man.
Like I said, I mentioned before, like virtually all of the guests I've had, they're promoting something. It's either a service, a book, and I'm absolutely fine with talking about that. I mean, again, for me, it's an important part of the reason why they're on. I mean, usually I end up kind of trying to get the book and read it before I kind of have people on, so I can kind of do that. I know that I saw on your website that you're in the process of writing a book. I mean,
that's right, man.
I appreciate anyone that can kind of do that. I've got like zero. I can just about get through reading a book every now and again. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to write a book, but
yeah, well, it's like the same way I read a book, same way I write a book. It's like little by little, little by little, and with so many different tools we have now at our disposal with the iPhone, you can write to that thing. I've got three I got two Mac computers and a iPhone, so I can pretty much, like, the nice thing is that when you write into one, it's like saves in all three of them, so it's like kind of, if that makes sense. So it makes it easier that way, instead of having to like pen and paper and the old fashioned way or whatever, how it goes. And what also do with podcasting too is that like it helps out having a lot of these ideas already put out there, and you get the transcripts for that kind of stuff. That way we have an idea, put things together. So it kind of helps having content already out there that you've already put down, though it's not written down, so to speak. It's been laid down. So that helps.
It's quite interesting. I think a lot of people think that it's all new. And I know that obviously I mentioned there about the Rodecaster Pro, the new versions have come out. There's probably been 4 versions since the one I've got. But at the end of the day, it's about the principles of things that matter. And I think when you look at it, the fundamentals and the principles will stay the same throughout. Even if the gear changes, the underlying things will always still be about that, telling stories and the hooks, and being sort of friendly and convivial and helpful, and again, understanding who your audience is. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest challenge I've had. Is I started off the podcast, it was originally called Bad Decisions with Jim Banks, but it didn't really make any sense, because Everyone's made bad decisions, and I wanted people to come on and share them with me. But then I changed the name to Digital Marketing Stories because I felt it encapsulated more about its stories about digital marketing. It's more obvious kind of what it is. And beauty of your podcast, you can change the name. Obviously, I've got a website that probably doesn't really reflect the new name, but that's by the by. I'm not going to go and create a new website just for the sake of it. I think sometimes if you're planning a podcast, you probably need to think far enough ahead to think of maybe some contingencies just in case, well, if this happens, I might need help.
But you always can change anything and everything. I changed my artwork before. I changed the title a couple of times. I put a title extension, but I've changed the artwork, changed the website, changed hosting plans, changed microphones, changed equipment, changed whatever, changed computers. So, I mean, you can change a lot of different things. Nothing's set in stone. You always can change stuff as you go. And I think the thing is, people think they jump in, think, well, I'm going to name my show The Chris Show. That's great. What does it mean? What does it tell anybody? What does that mean? Nobody's searching The Chris Show. Unless I'm somebody famous. But other than that, I'm not famous. So why would somebody search that? So, but I've already built the website. I've already built the all this stuff. Whatever. Maybe think those things through before you jump in. And another big thing that people don't do, and I did an episode recently about this, is that people do not get feedback on their podcast, like honest feedback on their podcast, like ever. And I think the reason why is because we're afraid of it. Like, we don't want to know that we may be doing the wrong thing. We spent hours on this podcast. Like, well, I don't want to hear that it's not that good, So it's hard to hear that. I think
it's funny. I remember one of the podcast episodes that I put out. So I was typing again, being all Mr. Vain. I was kind of typing in bad decisions with Jim Banks, and I came across this link, and I thought, well, that's not my website. And I'm sure you know him. There's a guy called Dave Jackson, right, who's like an award-winning kind of podcast guru, right? Everyone raves about him. I think he's actually just started working with Podpay. I think his website, School of Podcasts. And basically, he found one of my episodes and basically roasted it. And
no way.
Initially, I was like really pissed about it. I'm like, wow, how dare he kind of take it? But I thought to myself, this is somebody who, again, if I wanted to hire him as a consultant, probably would have charged me a ton of money, right? So I thought, I'll just take the feedback in the spirit in which it was given. I didn't ask for it, but I'll take it because he's kind of given me what I thought was really good feedback. I mean, as it was, I think on his website, he had to buy me a coffee. So I sent him a couple of bucks to kind of thank him for doing that. But, but it's sort of, you look at it and you think, well, again, as you say, like you should go and ask people what they think, right? And not because you want people to leave reviews and everything else. Again, I just think it's kind of, it would be so easy for me to go and get, 15 fake, profiles set up and leave 15 fantastic reviews. Meaningless, doesn't mean a thing. It won't change anything in terms of how I feel about it and how the people that listen to it feel about it. As you say, if people like it, they will tell other people about it. They'll come back and listen to more episodes, share it with other people. I mean, that's what you want. That's ultimately, if you
try to share it and try to share the episode with people who might listen to. Like, I know if somebody tried to get me to listen to one of their podcasts, it was some obscure sports team in like Ohio that I'm like, what that doesn't benefit me. Like, I wouldn't care about that anyway. So why you send it to me? Like, please check out our podcast. Like, that's not really something I'm like into, but okay. Or true crime or murder or something I would never be into. First, like, maybe ask her, hey, do you like these kind of content? And they say, no. Okay, we'll move on. They say, yeah, well, here, I have a podcast about that. Hey, check this out. So it's all about knowing who your audience is. And I think trying to go where your audience is and trying to say, hey, I've got a podcast, but I know that some of those groups, like Facebook groups and things like that, are very, very picky about like you posting your stuff on their little groups or whatever. So you have to kind of do it in kind of a sly way or whatever. But I love podcasting. I think it's a great tool. It's great fun, and anybody can do it. And listen, if I can do it, I think anybody can do it. So,
and you definitely can. You definitely can, Chris. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come on and talk to me today. So how can my listeners learn more about your business and how you can help them?
Yeah, everything is a one-stop shop. One stop at my website. That is podtasticaudio.com.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much for being a great guest. And yeah, I'll speak to you at some point in time on Threads, and we'll just kind of carry on the conversation there. It just remains for me to say, all the listeners, thanks very much for listening in. And hopefully I'll see you on the next episode of Digital Marketing Stories.
Thank you.